It's nice to get feedback on your homilies, and that often happens. I find that the most, I find that the most critical comments usually come from family members. That's a good thing. They know you best, so they can kind of get right in there. My father used to always say when he was living, oftentimes afterwards, he would say, "You had 3 perfectly good opportunities to end it, and you didn't. You missed them." So I think that was his way of saying, too long. I have others in the family who say things like, it's one of my sisters particularly, would always, especially around the holidays, she would say something positive about the world. We don't want to hear doom and gloom. And she's right. I oftentimes preach about the dark side of things out in the world, but there's a reason for that. Any serious student of Scripture would realize that every page of the Bible that was written when an author took pen to paper usually wasn't to write about how wonderful everything was. It was usually because there was difficulties and conflicts and troubles, and how do we make sense out of that? How do we come to reconcile that? How do we come to restore and make whole and find new life? That's how most of them were written. That's why most of them were written, to be honest with you. Just out of curiosity, I don't think many people write letters nowadays. I think when people communicate, they usually do it by texts or probably emails, are probably even passé at this point. But in the good old days, before all of that, how many used to write letters to your family and friends? Anybody? Okay. Let me ask you this. Did anybody here, out of curiosity, ever write a letter to one of their children saying the following? I noticed this week that you scored 1600s on your SATs, and that really reflects all your wonderful work of never missing a day of school and always getting a good night's sleep and always doing your homework, and good job. Did anyone ever write that letter to one of their kids? I didn't think so, yeah. That's not what we write. We usually write when things are difficult, all sorts of things, but anyone ever write an honest letter to somebody, one of those, like a tough love letter? Sometimes those are kind of difficult. You don't know how that's going to be taken. This is an aside. My father would not like this if he was here, because I just thought of this. I was talking to somebody yesterday on the phone who I haven't seen in many years. He was in my first parish, a young kid in my first parish. And he was reminding me, wants to get together this week, but he was reminding me that he's only married because of me. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, when we were first going together, they were kind of high school sweethearts, and they had some kind of a major falling out, and she cut off everything, wouldn't talk to him at all, wouldn't answer his phone calls, wouldn't open the door. It went on for quite a while. I would say it bordered on stalking personally, but that was way back. Anyway, he wanted me to intervene, and I said, no way. I said, why don't you write her a letter? I said, write her a letter. Just heart speaks to heart. He said, she won't read it. I said, trust me, she will. She did. 36 years later, happily married, 2 kids, the love of his life. But a letter, even in difficult times, can bring about new life. The word that we speak to each other, the words that we hear in Scripture, oftentimes they're given in the worst of situations. How do we deal with that? What does our faith have to say about that? In today's first reading, for example, we hear about King Cyrus from Persia. He was the one who restored Israel, who brought Israel out of the Babylonian exile, rebuilt their temple. He wasn't even a person of the covenant. He didn't even share their faith. He was a stranger. He was almost an enemy. And yet God spoke through that kind of a voice. In those days, the prophet Jeremiah was talking about what got God so upset, or at least in the author's way. It was because the people hadn't followed the way that God put before them. And it wasn't the things that we might expect. They weren't keeping holy the Sabbath and all of those things, but their greatest crimes were not listening to the prophets in their midst. They mocked the prophets and ridiculed the prophets. That's what led to their exile in the first place, not listening to the prophets in their midst. Who are the prophets in our midst this day? Do we hear them? Do we ridicule them? Do we mock them? Do we heed them? Do we listen to those who share our ideologies or our political parties or our faith persuasion or our way of looking at life and dismiss everybody else? Here is Cyrus, the king of Persia, a total opposite end of the world, was the one who was responsible for restoring them. Sometimes we're so good at following churchy things that don't amount to much. I was out having supper a couple of Fridays ago. It was a Friday in Lent. Went down to the Carb with some people, and I got great swordfish special. It was great. Anyway, somebody else was there who got a hamburger. I didn't want to say anything. I would never do that. I would never embarrass anybody. So I didn't say a word, but somebody else there said, "Oh, it's Friday, and you can't have that." And I was impressed because the people at the table all knew their catechism. They said, "Oh, no, this person is over 60. She's not obligated to that anymore." And they were right. It's not an issue at all. But they had all the ages. The fasting days have certain ages. The days of abstinence have different ages. If you're older, if someone in your house is sickly, say a child is sick, just because of the difficulty that it would take in making 2 meals, everyone's not obligated. No, those people knew that. It's kind of an odd thing. But we're so good at that minutiae stuff that comes down from church. But how does that translate into the real world? How does that translate into the times that we find ourselves in? Who are the prophets that kind of we ridicule and ignore? Think of someone like Father Dan Berrigan. He was the first Catholic priest who made the most wanted list in the FBI during the time of the Vietnam War, because he was speaking a word that was against all of that. Think of Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, it's Dorothy Day. All spent time in prison for various things, for speaking truth to power, so to speak, in a way that most people would not want to listen to, that they could easily ridicule or pass off or mock as just not real. Who are the voices in the world this day? How do we heed them? Somebody who looks like us, sounds like us. I watched the State of the Union address on Thursday night, and I think the most interesting thing to watch was the room, was the Congress. Whenever anything was said, you would have half of the room would stand up and cheer, and the other half would kind of either boo or kind of look glum. It didn't seem to make any difference what the person was saying. It was just who was saying it. But someone who thinks like us or in our party or our persuasion, we would kind of go along with it without much discernment. How do we listen to each other? How do we truly hear the prophets in our midst this day? It is little wonder that with great love, we humans made it up from the mud. It is little wonder that God's delight is to be with the children of men. All those who know us well know that we are a most delightful outfit. You see us on the subway, you meet us on the street, you live with us in your homes. We, the battered, broken, beautiful ones of God. Battered because we have been walked on by others. Broken because we have let ourselves fall. Beautiful, because in the gutter we reach out for the stars. Slug to the floor, knock to the ground, round after round, bout after bout, we rise every day, return to the ring, only to be knocked down again and come back for more. How could anyone hate such gluttons for life, such a lust to live? We never had a golden age, there never will be one. Human life in better times was always a mixed bag of mixed blessings. When Columbus saw the sun go down in the last landmarks of Europe, he must have died 1,000 times with doubt. But a new world paid back in full his blind hopes and made up indeed for all his fears. In these minutes of our experience, in these mountains of our doubt, can America now afford to fall into 300 million broken pieces of human plasm? No one can stop us now, but we can't stop ourselves. America, you never had a problem you couldn't solve. When people turned your wheels, there was never a wall to stop you. We have no reason now to doubt your ability to find your way out of the tunnel you were in. We were never here before. There is no map to where we are going. These are our funky years. But these too are the good old days. It all depends on our ability to ask the right questions and take the biggest step we ever took: criticize ourselves. Wonder out loud with one another, is this the way to go? Or are we down the wrong road? The only mistake we made in the past is that we could make no mistake. We who were so good to everyone could do no wrong. Now we know for sure we are not always right. What is more, we don't need to be. Sometimes to self-doubt and say no takes its own kind of courage. Dissent is another brand of love. The vital test of any human outfit lies in its members' freedom to disagree. America, go back to your roots. You have grown too big for your boots. Your future lies not with any infallible elite, but as it always has from the beginning, with the man and woman on the street.